Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Double Tap on YouTube. Last time we were chatting with James Rath, blind filmmaker, and he was telling me all about his thoughts on Apple Vision Pro. And I wanted to dig in more on AI, in particular from Apple, but also the new video creating features from OpenAI that have just been released. I'm going to ask you while you're here, everyone's talking about AI, obviously, constantly. And the big question at the moment is around this new video production tool that's come out from OpenAI just the other day. Yes, Sora, yes. So, which one? I mean, Sky. Is that in Japanese? Is it Sky in Japanese? I think that's right.
Good question. I didn't practice.
I think I read
my
that somewhere.
Beyond the greetings. and thank you.
What's your take on all this? And do you think it's? I mean, you're a filmmaker, right? So, does this worry you, or does this excite you?
You know, I think there's always that skepticism of like, man, what is this gonna do? Will this get regulated? You know, and I do hope there's some control. And OpenAI, you know, claims that there's some safety with this, but you know, all it takes is someone else to develop this too. It's like it's possible. So why couldn't someone, you know, different intentions, develop the same thing, or you know, find a backdoor? So I think there's always room for concern. There's also room for excitement. You know, I incorporate AI into a lot of my workflow. I'm a one-man show for the most part. My girlfriend helps me out with a lot of content creation stuff nowadays, but for the most part, I use ChatGPT to proofread a lot of my stuff, help me with like, you know, some ideas, and a lot of it's cheesy, but you know, I can find some things within it to you know, experiment with and play with. And I can also generate thumbnail ideas with it, which is a very interesting thing. It's like Dolly can help me. Like, I'd be like, hey, what would this look like if, you know, blind guy is jumping out of an airplane and from this angle, and then have him more center, you know, so I can like play with different ideas of thumbnails. I'm not jumping out of an airplane anytime soon. That's she won't let me, but no. So it's I'm excited for it, but I'm also, I mean, is video going too far? Like, it was one thing to generate pictures, right? You know, generate copyright or code, but maybe, I don't know. I think time will tell. This is the worst it's ever going to be, and I certainly do think it can play a role in helping people tell more stories and make content creation, the barrier to entry, more accessible than ever, right? You know, a lot of visually impaired and blind folks want to create content, want to make videos, but they don't necessarily always know how to edit or where to find that content. It's like, well, what if you could just ask Sora, like, hey, I need some B-roll for this topic I'm talking about. Generate these different 60-second videos, and then, you know, there's other editing AI tools, and it can start putting that together for you with your self-recorded iPhone footage. You know, so I think there's room for it.
And when do you think we'll see the first AI movie entirely made by AI?
Honestly, probably 2026. Maybe sooner, but I think, I mean, you're definitely gonna have independent filmmakers doing that first. But in terms of like a big studio, as long as it's like, you know, the unions and stuff aren't fighting to like block something like that, which they might. And honestly,
well, I mean, we've already had the big strikes, right? So I mean, it could well happen again.
Too. You know, I'd rather not. You know, I'd rather see it incorporated in some ways, but I don't want to see people like lose their jobs. And then there's something about the human touch of creativity that AI just can't always replicate, and I don't know if it always will be able to.
How do you square that circle though? Because you're into your tech, you're into, you know, you're a geek as probably as much as I am. You know, you love all this stuff, but equally you're kind of conscious that it doesn't have the heart that you perhaps need to make great content. You know, it's okay to use as a tool to help you make content, but the idea of it making the content, it sounds like that's what maybe doesn't excite you as much.
Yeah, I think, I mean, from what I've used and played with it can make a story, but it's not always the most compelling story. It's not always the most, like, it doesn't feel real. But then, like, as a blind storyteller myself, I mean, that's one of the big directions on my YouTube channel I'm really trying to go in. I'm stepping away from, like, doing straight unboxings and tech reviews and educational, like, you know, advocacy sit-down videos. And I'm trying to go in this direction where I'm storytelling. And, you know, there's a sprinkle of all that in it. Travel tech is like a tool and a prop in my videos, but ultimately I'm trying to tell you about an experience or a challenge that I'm trying to face, and sometimes just me trying to go into the metaverse. I didn't think there would be a story at the end of that tunnel, but there was. And let alone me going to Japan and playing this game all the way through. I couldn't predict the outcome of. I almost didn't beat that game, and I only had 20 minutes on the mountain, before conditions were unsafe and we couldn't, descend properly. And I somehow fought the hardest boss in that game, and it was a 50-50 chance I would have won with the move I chose. And I got the 50% coin flip that won me the game, and happy ending. So it's just like, I don't know, AI just can't, I don't think, tell those kinds of stories in the same way that feel real. I mean, because again, this is coming from someone who makes documentary style and vlog style, where it's like the stories I'm trying to tell are real,
Yeah.
So it's just that's my perspective. But I think, for scripted folks, people telling scripted stories, it might be a different take.
And what about Apple this year? Because the talk is at WWDC we're going to see the release of whatever Apple GPT or whatever they end up calling it.
I hope so.
I mean, I hope so too, because Siri really needs some help. I keep telling the story, James, on air about this. Every single time I use it to open Amazon, it says, what do you want to open, Prime or Amazon? And I say, Amazon. It says, opening Prime. And I think, this is rubbish. So, it's 2024. Come on, So, I mean, that's like one example. But honestly, Siri just doesn't feel like it's there yet on any level. And it really could do with a bit of an engine change.
I love Apple. I've worked with them in many different capacities, but I will never defend Siri. As someone who has invested in 4 HomePods, regrettably,
Yes.
Siri was the reason I bought an Alexa. It sold me. Siri is now going off, and sorry, it was trying to take my help.
Of course, I knew it's going to happen at some point. Yeah.
Yeah. It sold me on the Alexa. That's all it did.
That's
now I have
not
Alexa
great.
in every room.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was I wasn't big. I loved Apple's privacy stance in marketing, but if the product just doesn't work and if it's not good,
well, that's the question, isn't it? What do you forfeit? Because the other companies are getting it right because of, I'm not saying they're lax or in privacy, but ultimately data has to go into this in order to improve it. If Apple say, no, we're not giving our data across, it can't improve. So how are they going to square that circle in their own version of GPT? How's that going to work?
It's a great question, and I don't know. I'm sure they're going to try to, it's going to be the same kind of spiel we hear about, it's end-to-end encryption, and when you send data through it, it goes through 4 different servers, all with its own hash, and it's untraceable. Even Apple can't read what you say, but it's under the hood training our model. Maybe, who knows? I do hope that they take a different approach with it. That I can ask it maybe a medical question, right, about these symptoms I'm experiencing, and obviously we'll say I'm not a doctor, consult medical professional, but at least it will gather the data that's out there of but this sounds like you might have albinism. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I know.
But I do think Apple has potential there. Siri's been on a different language model, I guess is what you would call it. Again, I'm not that technical. We're techie, right? But we're not.
I know what you mean. Yeah,
I'm not a
it's
developer.
whatever. Yeah. Because we're all interested in it working, right? We want to use it.
It hasn't been able to improve though, because it's on an outdated. It can't get much better because of the way it was built from the start.
Yeah.
So Siri needed to be completely overhauled, as in replaced for a long time now. And I think ChatGPT was a wake-up call for Apple. And I don't think Apple was ignoring AI this whole time. I think ChatGPT, though, suddenly just came out of left field with hey, now all of you need to play catch-up more than ever. Because we've been seeing machine learning in... My iPhone does a great job with photos, gathering photos of people, and you could type in park right? It finds all these, not just that, say geotag of a park, but things that look like a park. And so there's some really good offline machine learning built into the iPhone with these Apple Silicon chips, but I think we're gonna go, if they're building something similar to ChatGPT, whether it is using cloud for processing or not, I do think Apple's gonna show us, hopefully, a reason to never have to say Siri again. Although it might still use the name, but I'm hoping maybe.
Been improved.
The name's been tarnished in my.
Yeah, that's the problem, right? You only get one chance at a good first impression, and maybe Apple just needs a second round at that. But maybe this is the year. I certainly hope it is. James, thank you so much for coming on today to Double Tap here on YouTube. Thank you so much for your time. Best of luck in everything you do.